Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, or good afternoon, depending on where you might be. My name is Igor Zuckerman, and I'm here to talk to you about investing in Sweden. A couple of housekeeping items first. Um, Allow me to introduce myself. First of all, I am President and Chief Investment Officer of Passpon Advisors. I've been in the industry for over 20 years, worked for companies like JP Morgan, Bear Stearns, and Merrill Lynch. I've had some startup experience, and my expertise is in portfolio management, quantitative development, risk management, and technology. A couple of words about our company and what we do. We are Passpon Advisors, is a next generation financial advice firm. We rely on technology to create sensible and affordable financial solutions for our clients. So we manage client assets and use technology to automate portfolio asset allocation. We specialize in building thematic portfolios, and we also manage hedge fund portfolio for our qualified investors. Now, one last housekeeping item. There will be a disclaimer at the end of the presentation, but just wanted to let everybody know, since we will be talking about specific investments, these are not recommendations to buy or sell securities. This is for informational purposes only. Our clients or hedge fund may have positions in some of the investments that we will be discussing, we also always encourage investors to do their own homework on any potential securities or ideas that we will be presenting in this presentation. You may have noticed that the name of the presentation is Take a Chance on Me, and some of you may have recognized that's one of the titles of ABBA, arguably one of the greatest Swedish exports. So it seemed appropriate to name the presentation that way, and some of the slides are actually also named after ABBA titles. So if you're not a fan, I apologize in advance. And with that, let us dive right in. And the next slide is S.O.S. That's another ABBA title. And we're talking here about Eurozone crisis. This little chart, if you can see the details, shows you the GDP growth in Eurozone, or in most cases contraction, for the past 8 years since the 2008 crisis. Obviously, it's been a zone of distress. A number of bailouts have been handed out to countries, including Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Greece, and Cyprus. And that's not to mention a few other European countries that needed bailout, that have done this a different way or gotten through IMF, including Hungary and Romania, for example. And of course, Greece has gotten it several times. There's a next big uncertainty, obviously, unless you've turned off the TV for the past couple of months. Then you obviously know about Brexit, the coming exit of the UK from the European Union, and all sorts of uncertainties that it brings with it. And the weak spots include Italian bank loans and potentially yet another round of Greece crisis. So if you are attending any other webinars today within the European Equities Summit, I am sure other presenters will be talking to you about potential opportunities in European equities within the Eurozone. What I will be talking to you today is a country in Europe that's not in Eurozone that we think presents great investment opportunities, and that's Sweden. And this first slide is at the beginning of the investment thesis for it. So let's talk about Sweden. Just the basics. So here is Sweden on the map of Europe. The population is just under 10 million people, so it's a small country population-wise. You can see the world rank here as well. Its GDP, on the other hand, is nearly $500 billion, which ranks 21st in the world. And in GDP per capita, it's almost $49,000 per capita, which makes it number 7 in the world. Just stop and think about it for a second. This is one of those economic stats that usually shocks people that do not pay close attention to Sweden. They're really number 7 in the world in GDP per capita. Education and healthcare within the Swedish system, they're mostly funded by taxes, which means they're largely free to people who actually need education and healthcare. And by various measures, they rank very high among other countries in the world. Unemployment rate as of June is 6.8%, which may seem a little high, but compared to other European countries, it's definitely way below average. And we'll be talking about other economic numbers in a little bit. Inflation is also pretty low. Debt as percent of GDP is 47%. Maybe 10 years ago that would seem like a large number, but in today's world, that's a very manageable debt load. In fact, by comparison, Eurozone members, Italy, for example, are at 133% of GDP. Portugal is at 128%. France and Spain are at 99%. The United States are currently at 107%. So just, I'm not even talking about Japan, which is nearly 250%. Again, at 47%, a very manageable external debt, and the coveted AAA credit rating from S&P and Moody's, which only a handful of countries in the world still have. Looking at Sweden inflation, as you can see over the last couple of years, it's been negligent. It's actually only showing up a little bit in 2016. Like I said, it's up to 1.1% to this date. The bottom graph also shows the Sweden interest rate, which is managed by the central bank, the Riksbank, and you can see that this is negative. This is the brave new world we live in. Sweden is one of the leaders, if you may say so, in the negative interest rate department. So it's currently roughly at negative 0.5%. And the next, so my apologies. This was the slide I was just describing. And the next slide will show the comparison of some of these economic values between Sweden and the Eurozone. and that's really your name of the game. So you can see that compared to the average of the Eurozone, the GDP growth rate has been higher for Sweden for a long time, except perhaps the last quarter where it's catching up. The unemployment rate in Sweden, as I mentioned, is way below the average of the Eurozone, and the interest rate is also currently much lower, which is a questionable feat, but nevertheless, that's where it is. The Swedish economy the, is very reliant on trade. So this is the heat map of exports, and I know it's a little hard to see, but the parts that you can see are cars and various other equipment and petroleum, refined oil, telephones, and medical devices. These are all top exports of Sweden as an industrialized country. This is what you would expect an industrialized country to be exporting. On the right, you can see the list of the main trading partners. It's no surprise that a large portion of exports goes to Norway, Finland, and Denmark. These are the Nordic neighbors of Sweden. And obviously other European countries, the big economies of Germany and the UK, Netherlands, Belgium, and France are basically all the larger and close European countries. The U.S. is the only non-European country on the list, which also is a pretty significant portion of the export at 7.7%. So, in the nutshell, that was the economic and demographic situation of Sweden. To summarize, we're looking at a relatively small country population-wise, but a country with some natural resources, with a place where education and healthcare are at a very high level, and where the population has one of the highest GDP per capita in the world. Plus, the central bank provides the low, in fact, negative interest rate, which all makes it, and obviously the country exports a lot of high tech and technology goods. This is the crux of the investment thesis for Sweden, and of course the fact that it still maintains its own currency, the Swedish krona, which is one of the major G10 currencies. They actually voted in a referendum against adopting the euro, one of the very few countries that have done that. Because of that, the central bank has that extra wiggle room to allow to dictate their own monetary policy, and that's why their rate is so low, because they believe that their negative rate will continue to help their exporters. So, if you're a U.S. investor, how can you invest in Sweden? And we are based in U.S., so I apologize to non-U.S. listeners. This is a U.S.-centric sort of presentation, if you will. at least this portion of it. So in US, there is really about three options if you'd like to invest passively. And those three options are in front of you. These are the funds that have a significant exposure to Sweden. The first two are ETFs, and the third one is Fidelity Nordic Mutual Fund. Only one of them, however, the EWG ETF, has for practical purposes 100% Sweden exposure. The other two, the GFX ETF and the Fidelity Nordic Mutual Fund, really invest in the entire Nordic region, which includes Finland and Norway and Denmark as well as Sweden. And so their exposure to Sweden is closer to 50% rather than 100%. As you can see, they roughly have the same holdings. The expense ratio of the two ETFs is very similar. The 0.99% expense ratio of the mutual fund, well, for a mutual fund, that's especially a foreign mutual fund, that's fairly low. They'll invest in dividend yielding stocks, so you can see the yield, although it varies for all of them. And interestingly enough, the performance also is very different. So year to date, especially, as you can see, GFX is actually negative year to date. And the 5-year annualized, the mutual fund where the active management is outperforming the two ETFs quite significantly. So given that the EWD ETF is really the one that has 100% exposure to ETF, we should dive into it a little bit more. So if you were to choose this for your investment in Sweden, your sector breakdown is quite different than what you would expect in, let's say, investing into S&P 500 in US. Financial services take up 30% of that ETF, and industrials and technology further 25 and 12, respectively. So these three top sectors are effectively 2/3 of your portfolio. It's worth noting, by the way, that as far as banks are concerned, Sweden has gone through its own version of the 2008 crisis that came much earlier in, I believe it was 91, 92 period, with very similar reasons to the U.S. crisis of 2008. After housing bubble, most of the banks, if not all of them, were effectively insolvent and could not pay out their debt. And the government had to step in and essentially guarantee the deposits for the banks in exchange for the banks to provide the government with equity ownership, which after a while, so effectively the banks were nationalized, but after a while they were privatized again. And now it's a healthy banking industry, and as you can see, a lot of the large cap companies in the index, in the Stockholm index, which the EWD ETF follows, are in fact banks. The other thing you can see on this chart, on the chart below rather, is the comparison over the last 5 years. of the EWD ETF with the US S&P 500 ETF SPY, as well as the representative ETFs for the UK, Germany, and France. You would notice that the SPY is definitely the big winner compared to all the European companies, European countries, and the EWD, which is white on the graph, is sort of right in the middle, although it was leading earlier in the decade compared to Germany, France, and UK. The top holdings. As we mentioned, there are 34 holdings in the EWD ETF. These are some of the top holdings, and they're ranked here by the market cap, which is represented in billions of the Swedish krona. The exchange rate today is roughly 8.45 krona to a dollar. So if you looking to convert that into dollar figure, that's what you would use. As you look at this list, chances are you recognize a number of names. The first one on the list, Hannes and Moritz, happens to be the largest Swedish company by market cap. Most U.S. investors and consumers would know it by its initials, H&M. That's a retail giant that has stores, over 3,000 stores altogether, I believe, and a large number in U.S. As well as in Europe and in Middle East and Asia. As I promised, there are several banks here, including Nordea Bank, Swedbank, Svenska, and a few others that didn't make the top of the list. Another company that I am sure everybody's familiar with is Ericsson. In fact, this is one of only 4 Swedish companies that is dual listed in Sweden and in US. Volvo, I'm sure, is also another familiar name. It's on the list as well. Electrolux is probably also a familiar name here. So these are some of the largest companies in terms of market cap in Sweden, and you can get them all in one ETF, and in fact a few other names in the ETF. For a U.S. investor who is looking to invest in individual names in Sweden, as I mentioned, these are the only 3 fund choices that U.S. investor has, and there's only 4 individual stocks listed in U.S. 2 of them are microcap, actually. If the U.S. investor is looking to invest directly into any of these companies, they would need to open a brokerage account either in Sweden, or luckily these days some of the U.S. brokers allow investors to trade in Sweden from U.S. accounts. Our firm uses Interactive Brokers, and I would definitely recommend you check them out. They do provide the market data, and the commissions are reasonable. So if you're looking to trade directly in Sweden or invest directly in Sweden from U.S. Interactive Brokers, and potentially some other brokers may allow you to do that today. So Other than the large caps that have been mentioned, there's several um, several other equity opportunities. And again, I would remind you, these are not necessarily recommendations to buy or sell. These are some of the names that we are following. So you can definitely do your own homework to find out more about them. Um, Autoliv, that's a second Swedish company that trades in New York as well as in Sweden. It's a major auto parts manufacturer with almost $10 billion market cap. Another company is Hexagon. It's a very interesting company, and by the way, I believe it's also part of EWD ETF. It's a global leader of design, measurement, and visualization technologies. Um, they have some unique applications that include geosystems, metrology, and data analysis. So as they measure as they gather all these different measurements, they provide not only visualization of that, but also the data analysis, which is a very hot area right now. So an interesting company to look into. Elekta is a medical devices company. They specialize in products that treat neurological disorders and also cancer radiation. Effectively, globally, there's only one company that competes with them in those niche areas, and that's Varian. That's a U.S. company. So Elekta, in addition to having a significant global market, they may also be a takeover target. Rumors keep popping up here and there. So that's another interesting company to keep tabs on. Fingerprint cards. This is a company that has managed to develop an electronic system that uses fingertip patterns to identify a person. As you can imagine, this day and age, especially with terrorism threats and increased security, this is a pretty hot commodity, especially in Europe. And in fact, this company was the best performing stock, the best number one performing stock in Europe last year. It was a high flyer. It's definitely a volatile name. It's now up to a mid cap in its range. It's at 34 billion Swedish krona, but definitely another company to follow. And one more. I'm trying to limit myself to just 5 names. There's definitely a lot more that I could talk about. But we'll finish up with this one, Arcam. This is a 3D printing company. They specialize in metals. They're industrial 3D printer. They serve most of their clients have been in Europe, I believe in Germany, as well as in China. But recently they've been expanding into US and in fact opened a US office. On top of that, even though it's still a very small cap company, it's been included into the new ETF. PRNT is the ticker. That's the new 3D printing ETF that debuted about a month ago, I believe. So another company interesting company to potentially follow. I see there are some questions in the audience. I'll get to them shortly as soon as I'm done with the rest of the presentation. So just bear with me, please. So now moving on. in addition to large cap and small cap startups. This is an area that also people who don't follow Sweden would probably be surprised to find out that Sweden is actually number 2 in Europe in terms of unicorns. Unicorns, of course, are the private companies with at least a $1 billion valuation. So after the UK, which is the expected place for those mythical creatures to inhabit, Sweden is number 2, and it's also, according to some research, it's number 2 in the world in unicorns per capita. So that number for US, for the Silicon Valley, is I believe 8.9 per million people, and in Sweden it's 6.3 again. Not that many unicorns, but then again, it's a population of less than 10 million people, so it's pretty impressive. For those of you old enough to remember file sharing websites, Kazaa and uTorrent, which I am not 100% sure, but I believe have gone the same way as a similar sites in U.S. have gone, meaning have been deemed illegal. However, they were founded in Sweden. They were created by Mr. Zenstrom and Mr. Eck, respectively. And those two gentlemen, after they were done with Kazaa and uTorrent, have gone on to build Skype and Spotify. And those two are the largest of the 5 unicorns that have come out of Sweden in the past decade or so. And in fact, you can see on the right the logos of the 5 companies that came out, and you're probably familiar with most of them, or you would recognize them anyway. King is the company that developed Candy Crush. So that's a game developer that IPO'd in New York in 2014 at over $7 billion at the time. And then as the price came down a little bit, it was acquired by Activision Blizzard in 2016 for just under $6 billion. Mojang, that's a game developer behind the name Minecraft and a few other titles that you may not know. It was acquired by Microsoft in 2014 for $2.5 billion. Skype, of course, was also acquired by Microsoft a few years before that in 2011 for $8.5 billion. So you can see Microsoft was very active in buying out Swedish unicorns, and in fact, $8.5 billion is the largest acquisition by Microsoft in its entire history. Spotify, the streaming music service, that's the largest unicorn, not only in Sweden, but I believe in all of Europe today. The last funding round was at $8.53 billion. And the 5th unicorn may be the one that you may know the least about. Klarna, that's a digital payments for online storefronts company. Today, over 40% of all online transactions in Sweden go through this company, and they're global, so they have presence in other places in Europe as well. And then I've listed a few other up-and-comers. There's literally dozens and dozens of promising startups in Sweden today. And again, the educated, the high education in Sweden and the economic environment is allows for a number of startups in similar situations to, let's say, places like United States and UK and Israel, where startups can thrive. So why am I talking about startups? in the investing format, there are a couple of ways you can invest into startups. And this slide is titled "Money, Money, Money." If you are an Uber fan, then you knew this was coming probably. So the money here is the money that invests into those startups and private equity. Obviously, there is venture capital. This is just a few of the top names of Sweden-based venture capital, which is now a pretty developed group of companies. That's not to say that foreign venture capitalists don't invest in Sweden startups, and in fact, some of the larger U.S. and U.K. And German venture capitals definitely invest there, but these are just the names of the top Swedish ones. Spotify does have a few public investors. So Telia, which is one of the larger telecoms, one of the larger companies in Sweden, is a public investor. Another way potentially to get exposure to Spotify, if you're a U.S. investor, is to buy shares of GSV Capital, which trades in New York under the ticker GSVC, which is a publicly traded venture capital, and I believe they have an allocation of around 4% to Spotify. And of course, Coca-Cola and Goldman Sachs are another two public investors in Spotify, although you probably wouldn't buy those just for their exposure to Spotify. If you are looking for an exposure to other startups in Sweden, Investor AB, that's a publicly traded asset manager in Sweden, and in fact, it's also one of the top 5 in market cap in Sweden. This is the company that has investments in public companies such as Saab, SEB, Nasdaq, Ericsson, Atlas Copco, and a few others. But it also has Investor Growth Capital, the venture capital arm that invests in a number of different startups, some of those that were listed on the previous slide as well. So that potentially may be another way for you to get an exposure to Swedish startups. And that pretty much concludes our presentation for today. This is the disclaimer that I promised you, with also a little tidbit about our company and about what we do. So at this point, I will get to the questions. So I have a couple of questions here. Without the Brexit, would Sweden have been a strong option? That's an interesting question. I am doing this presentation within the summit on the European equities, and so the Brexit comes up eventually, and the comparison to other European countries comes up eventually. But I do believe that the Swedish economy on its own warrants some interest. It's obviously not as large and diverse as, let's say, UK and Germany, but as hopefully you have seen from the presentation, there are a number of different interesting investment options. And overall, I believe that the country and its economy create an interesting opportunity with or without Brexit or other issues in Europe. So hopefully that answers your question. The other question that I have deals with Norway, and the question is, would Norway be better? Norway is definitely another interesting option. It's similar to Sweden in a number of different ways. It's Sweden's neighbor. It has its own currency as well, the Norwegian krona, and it has a number of natural resources, namely oil. Its Norwegian wealth fund, the sovereign wealth fund, is one of the largest in the world, and they also have a number of interesting potentially investment options. However, I believe Norway is first of all, it's a smaller country. The number of investment opportunities is even smaller than in Sweden, if you thought Sweden was small. And I would say that's also an interesting place to look into. But like I mentioned, I believe, with the exception of two or three mega cap companies, well, I shouldn't say mega cap, large caps, large caps, if you will. The investment opportunities may be somewhat muted in Norway. There's a number of small caps that may be interesting. You would have to invest into them directly, again, by going to the Norwegian exchange. By the way, all the Nordic exchanges in Oslo, in Stockholm, and in Helsinki, they're owned by Nasdaq. So they're highly technological and easy to navigate. But you would have to invest in Norway directly into those small companies, and the startup scene is nowhere close to Sweden. So if you're looking at smaller companies or early development stage, that's not the same as in Sweden. I'll wait for another minute or so to see if there's any other questions that anybody has on the presentation on Sweden or anything related. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, I thank you for joining me today. I hope that the presentation was interesting, that you've learned something you didn't know before, and thanks for being with us. Have a good day.